team like Kyrie and KD, or the Lake Show with King James and AD. Wish I could match him up with the bad boys from the 80s, but no black and white, I need that in HD. HenDawgz.
Yo, what's good, y'all? It's your boy HenDawgz, and we back to it. You know how we do it. Another day, another making the case video. My last video was Bill Russell, and today we got Wilt Chamberlain. I feel like this was kind of the rivalry of the 60s and 70s was Bill Russell and Wilt Chamberlain. So, hey, I actually got a lot of questions about Wilt Chamberlain too that hopefully they answer in this making the case video, or hopefully y'all answer it in the comments, because there's a lot of stuff that I heard about Wilt Chamberlain that I don't know how true it is. So make sure y'all subscribe to the channel if y'all haven't. Make sure y'all like this video if y'all like this video, and go ahead and write something in the comments. Right, where do y'all rank Wilt Chamberlain at as far as the greatest players of all time? Because I feel like what I've been getting a lot lately about Wilt is he had, back then he was kind of the LeBron James of the league back then, which he put up a lot of stats, but it always didn't kind of transition to winning. And I don't know how I agree with that now that I'm thinking about it, because LeBron got what, 4 championships, 3-4 championships. I don't think Wilt had that many. So I think that LeBron was more of a winner than Wilt. But let me know in the comments what y'all think about that. That's something I've been seeing, but let's get into this video. I don't know too much about Wilt, so I'm happy that we're going through this. Let's get to it, man. We got making the case Wilt Chamberlain. Let's get it.
Basketball is special. The size of the court and the lack of pads or helmets give fans the most intimate experience of a team sport that exists. And because of the different styles that basketball allows for, players develop their own distinct identities and signature styles through their creativity, flair, and athleticism.
What y'all drinking on,
and
man?
Although no player succeeds alone, the scoring volume and two-way nature of the sport give individual stars a nearly unprecedented amount of control over the flow and outcome of a game. For this reason, players are constantly compared to their peers and to the legends of the past in order to answer the most hotly contested question in the sport: who's the greatest to ever do it? For many, the question is redundant. They believe in only one right answer, their answer. Others might have their own personal stance, but acknowledge one or two alternatives. But I believe that there's much more nuance to the question of greatness and more answers to it than you might think.
Rank those 3 for me real quick. Before we start going into Wilt, go ahead and rank Bill Russell, Wilt Chamberlain, and Kareem 1 to 3 right now. Right now, before we get started, I want to kind of see where y'all rank those 3 at. So let me know.
By my count, there are 8 players in NBA history that have a substantial claim as the GOAT. It's a subjective thing, though. I can't give you a definitive answer. All I can do is make the argument. So today, I'll be making the case for Wilt Chamberlain as the greatest basketball player of all time.
Yes, Sirski. Wilt is still. The man averaged 50 and 25 for a season?
Wilt. The single most dominant physical force basketball's ever seen. That's the case, right? First, I tell you that Wilt Chamberlain was and remains the most outstanding anomaly of physical superiority that has ever played basketball.
Sheesh.
Then I tell you about how his era-specific advantages didn't exist, and that Bill Russell had better teammates, which is why he won so many more championships than Chamberlain. That's how the Wilt Chamberlain argument always goes. If I follow that script beat for beat, I'll be making a video that's already been made 100 times. So let's write a different script. We'll hit some of the same notes and see some of the same landmarks, but maybe we can end up somewhere we haven't been before when it comes to Wilton Norman Chamberlain. Where did Wilt come from?
Government.
I don't mean where did he grow up. I'm not making a biography. I mean, what did basketball know of Wilt before he stepped into his first NBA game in 1959? We know about the hype surrounding LeBron, Jordan being taken 3rd in the draft, Magic and Larry's college rivalry, and I think it's important to know and understand what Wilt was before he became the Big Dipper. Wilt was the first basketball superstar. Coming out of high school, he had over 200 colleges vying for his commitment. a level of attention completely unheard of for a high school prospect at the time. He committed to the University of Kansas, largely because of head coach Phog Allen's deep ties with James Naismith, basketball's inventor.
Where did Wilt Chamberlain grow up at? Like, what city, what city state did he grow up in? If you're from that area, kind of let me know. Or if you just know people from that area or you've been to that area, kind of let me know, what it was like, playing basketball in those times where he played at. Because obviously he did something right growing up, because he was this physical specimen that nobody came close to. And that's something I feel like a lot of people always say, like, well, Wilt wasn't playing against nobody. But that should tell you right there how great Wilt was, because how come he wasn't just one of those, nobodies? He was obviously this super great anomaly that was a great player that just stood out. So why did he stand out, over those people that was just so-called just average players? Like, he was still, you can't take away his greatness because everybody else was trash. So let me know what y'all think about that.
Of course, freshmen weren't normally allowed to play on varsity in those days, so during his JV season, the NCAA introduced sweeping changes to rules like offensive goaltending and inbounding violations to try to mitigate what they perceived as a threat to the competitive balance of the game. They even introduced rules that would prevent Wilt from dunking the ball from the free throw line for his foul shots after they got wind that he was doing so in summer scrimmages. Crazy. And so began the influence of basketball's Goliath. A name fit for Chamberlain not just because of his size, but because of the danger that he seemed to pose to the game's very foundations. Despite the new regulations, in Chamberlain's first varsity game, he scored 52 points and grabbed 31 rebounds.
Oh my God.
Single-game records for Kansas that still stand today. His first varsity season concluded in the NCAA championship against the undefeated University of North Carolina. The matchup was broadcast on an unprecedented number of radio and television stations, due in large part to Chamberlain's mythical status. The Jayhawks fell to the Tar Heels in triple overtime despite Chamberlain's best efforts, for which he was named the tournament's most outstanding player. And so the seeds of Wilt Chamberlain's enduring basketball legacy were planted.
So he had 52 and 30, or no, they said that was his first ever game. But they said he balled out, went crazy in the championship game against the Tar Heels, went to triple overtime, but he lost. And I'm keep hearing that was the trend for Wilt Chamberlain, that he would just go crazy. He would have all these, amazing stats, but he just wouldn't win. So, hey, is Bill Russell better because of that? Or is it a team sport?
An outstanding player who put forth Herculean efforts and gave us superlative performances that were nonetheless negated by losing. After one final year at Kansas, Chamberlain joined the Harlem Globetrotters in order to earn money for himself until he became eligible to enter the NBA. In 1959, Wilt joined the Philadelphia Warriors. By the time he retired in 1973 with the Los Angeles Lakers, Wilt had changed basketball more than any player before or since. Here are some of his records. Highest PER for a highest career PER. The NBA's all-time leader in rebounds. As the NBA's second highest career overall in total defensive win shares. Second to win shares, win shares.
All type of shit, basically.
Rebounds in a per game average for a season. Highest rebounds per game average for a season. Unofficial season. Blocks in a highest rebound per game average.
So I see where people kind of getting the LeBron thing from, because when it's all said and done, LeBron is gonna have a whole bunch of crazy records too. But does that necessarily make you the GOAT, or does that make you a stat pattern? And I don't know, man. I kind of go back and forth with this, because I just reacted to LeBron's 56-point game. Like he was going wild, and I got a lot of feedback where it was just like, it's typical LeBron, just stat padding and this and that, and just kind of talking bad about him, padding his stats. But how is padding your stats a bad thing? Isn't that helping your team, putting your team in a better position to win? I mean, correct me if I'm wrong. I want to hear y'all feedback on this. Like, a lot of people kind of downgrade or kind of use it as a negative if a person is doing a bunch of different things in the game. Like, same with Westbrook. It's the same thing. It's like all he do is pad his stats. Like, he's not really a winner. He's not really, trying to make his teammates better. He's just padding his stats. And I don't know how I feel about that. I feel like if you're going out there and you have positive stats, that means you're doing things to help your team, to try to help your team win. At the end of the day, it's a team sport. You can't win by yourself. You can't. But if you out there with 25 points, 13 rebounds, 12 assists, 4 steals, 3 blocks, like, yeah, you padding your stats, but those are positive things, right? Let me know, man. Let me know. I'm very confused about the whole stat padding negative connotation that I get.
Wilt holds more records than anyone else in basketball. If someday in the future every tape of basketball is destroyed and all of the media and commentary about the game is lost, leaving us with only the record books, people will come to the conclusion that Wilt Chamberlain was far and away the greatest basketball player of all time.
People with ADHD save 10 hours studying with this Chrome extension. But no, by all means, go ahead, skip
time. On top of his records, Wilt won 4 MVPs, 3 of which came consecutively and 1 of which came in his rookie year. 2 championships with 1 Finals MVP award. He would have won in 1967, but the award didn't exist yet.
So what was his record in the finals? LeBron is what, like 4-6 or 3-6 or something like that? What was Wilt's record? I kind of want to compare their finals records to see if I can get a little bit more of that comparison to make sense.
He was selected to 13 All-Star teams and 10 All-NBA teams. His resume would have been even more impressive. But things like Defensive Player of the Year and All-Defensive teams didn't exist back then. His career accolades are certainly impressive, and they place him deeply into the conversation as the GOAT. But the funny thing about Chamberlain's records is that each of them comes with this kind of baked-in asterisk or caveat. Okay, he averaged 50 points for a game for a whole season, but that was back when there were no other players of his size. Or sure, he averaged that many rebounds, but back then the pace was totally different, so they came more easily. We'll get into those caveats about Wilt's era in a second, but isn't it funny that Wilt is the only player whose stats get scrutinized so thoroughly? We as basketball fans are so obsessed with stats and scoring, but when it comes to Wilt, we overlook so much of what he did. We love it when players score, more than anything. Oh, Michael dropped 55 on the Knicks after he came back from baseball. Kobe scored 81 in a single game.
Hey.
But when it comes to maybe the most talented and natural scorer the game's ever seen, we look for ways to discredit him.
Too little, Kareem.
He dominates the tops of the records so often that I think we've developed a sort of mental filter where we ignore his name and look at everyone else's. For so many of the players that have a case as the GOAT, I find myself having to justify the fact that they don't have the best stats of all time. But with Wilt, I find myself having to justify his stats because they're too good. To understand how he was able to achieve such eye-popping stats, let's talk about what a superhuman athlete he was. While he was at Kansas, Wilt was a superb track and field athlete. He excelled at a number of short-distance sprinting events, competed in the shot put and triple jump, and won the Big 8 conference in high jump every year he attended Kansas.
At 6'10".
Arnold Schwarzenegger once described working out with Wilt Chamberlain.
Wilt Chamberlain.
You trained with Wilt Chamberlain?
Yeah, Wilt Chamberlain would be in the gym, but we eventually ended up doing a movie together.
Yeah, Conan.
Conan the Destroyer, exactly. Yeah. But yeah, I was a big fan of his because he came to the gym and he would do a tricep extension. Like the big guys, the strongest guys, would do, let's say, 120 pounds, let's say, tricep extension, pulling down, right? He would come and he would do 150, 170 pounds, Wilt Chamberlain. That's how strong he was.
They always said he was by far the strongest person who's ever played the NBA.
Absolutely. I mean, I remember that he lifted me up like with one arm like nothing.
Along with Jim Thorpe, Wilt Chamberlain was the preeminent athletic talent of the 20th.
They said that Arnold Schwarzenegger said that he was going to work out with real weightlifters. Like, what wasn't a weightlifter? He was a basketball player. And they said that the real weightlifters, the ones that do that shit for a living, they was lifting 120. Wilt came in and started lifting 160, 170. Like, that's crazy. Like, how crazy of an athlete he was, how strong he was. And he was a hooper.
At over 7 feet tall. Had Chamberlain lived in another time, they would have built statues and temples to him. And on top of all of it, he was a tremendous passer and led the league in assists in 1968. That season, he finished with 702 assists, just 2 fewer than Ricky Rubio's ever racked up in a single season.
That's crazy.
As far as his basketball skill set, Wilt's biggest flaw was his infamous free throw shooting. Definitely a deficiency, but not one that I think...
So why do y'all think that he led the league in assists for a season? Like, they didn't say that he was always in the top, assist categories throughout his career. It was like this one season where he just led the league in assists. And I think that's kind of interesting because I wonder back then was he hearing a bunch of bad stuff about him, like all he wants to do is score and they're not really winning, and can he be a team player or something like that? I don't know. Maybe they're gonna talk about it more, but I wonder if all that happened and then after that is when he led the league in assists. If that's the case, then Wilt might be, man, he might have a chance on being a GOAT. The fact that he hear what's going on and he able to go out there on the court and do what he wants, do whatever he wants. That's pretty much what I think considers the GOAT. Can you go out there and successfully do whatever you want? That's what it puts you in my GOAT category.
Mars his overall prowess. Some of his success and records surely came from the era that he played in. Basketball was dramatically different in the 60s and early 70s when Wilt was playing. Back then, there were more field goal attempts, which resulted in more points and available rebounds.
It was more field goal attempts?
And back then, the average player wasn't nearly as athletic as the average player today. Sure, there were other big centers like Walt Bellamy and some others, but Wilt was decades ahead athletically and had an advantage in nearly every game because of that. So that's it, right? Wilt was ahead of his time athletically, competed against scrawny white guys in a faster era that made stat inflation easier. If you were to take a 27-year-old Wilt Chamberlain and put him in the league today, he'd be just another good player who kills it on the glass like Andre Drummond.
What?
No. For one, the advantages of Wilt's era help make sense of how he was able to set such unbreakable records, but it doesn't detract or excuse the fact that he was actually able to accomplish them. Second, yeah, a 27-year-old Wilt Chamberlain straight from 1964, if you plucked him up and put him into the league today, would have been a great player. Would he be an all-time great? Maybe, maybe not. But you're giving him more credit than you think you are when you say that. Imagine
27-year-old Wilt Chamberlain, you put him in the NBA right now. How much is he at? What's his points per game? What's his rebounds per game? And what's his blocks per game? Write in the comments right now. I want to see what y'all think Wilt Chamberlain would do in his prime in the NBA right now. I'm actually pretty curious.
You instead took a 13-year-old Wilt Chamberlain and brought him up as a player like every other great prospect. Now he gets to take advantage of 60 years worth of advancement in nutrition, exercise regimentation, recovery science, transportation, and equipment technology, especially the advancement in shoes. You know that they used to play basketball in Chuck Taylors, right?
I don't know.
You'd be giving Wilt Chamberlain the opportunity to capitalize on his most valuable attributes. That Wilt Chamberlain would be an all-time great any way you want to look at it. And finally, yes, Wilt took advantage of the inefficiencies of his era. But isn't that what everyone does? Every player has era-specific advantages that they use for their benefit. What's Steph Curry supposed to say? You know what, guys? I know that the game today revolves around three-point shooting, and I'm really good at three-point shooting, but it just gives me too much of an advantage, so I just won't take as many. Of course not. Take advantage of your advantages.
Exactly.
It's what great players do. All of this stuff I'm saying might not even matter to you. You might be sitting there with your arms crossed saying, nope, Wilt Chamberlain can't be the best because he played in the past. And I didn't see him, so he can't be the best. And honestly, I get that. As sports fans, we want to see the best. It's why we watch. What fun is it to admit that the best player your sport's ever seen started his career the same year Alaska was admitted into the Union? It happens in everything. Music, film, sports. It's the struggle between nostalgia and recency bias. But just because it might be a bummer to admit that you didn't see the best doesn't mean it can't be true.
That's okay.
So why can't a player...
If you never seen the GOAT, that's okay, because that's the point of me doing these reaction videos. So that you can watch the older guys and then you can decide like, hey, you know what? I think Wilt Chamberlain, you know what? I think Bill Russell, blah, blah, Larry Bird, Michael Jordan, he is the GOAT because I watched the HenDawgz reaction videos and now I think that they're the GOAT. Like, I didn't grow up on it, but hey, as reaction videos prove me otherwise. So, shout out to my reaction videos.
Be the best. I'm sure a lot of you, though, might be willing to concede that a player from that era could be the best, but you wouldn't say it was Chamberlain. I'm sure some of you are saying it's his rival, Bill Russell. Russell won 11 championships in 13 years compared to Wilt's 2. Russell was described as the ultimate competitor and as a leader who time and time again inspired and enabled his teams to succeed.
So, my question to y'all is, Bill Russell won 11 championships in 13 years. So those 2 years that he didn't win, was those two years that Wilt Chamberlain won? I feel like that would only make sense. Like I feel like that should be it. But let me know if that's the case.
And that brings us to the crux of Wilt Chamberlain's case. History says that Wilt was the ultimate athletic specimen who excelled in every physical sense, but who had a critical lack of killer instinct. According to his reputation, Wilt was missing the leadership abilities and intangible mental qualities that are required to win. Wilt is remembered as someone who chased stats, was a bit of a head case, and could never figure out exactly what it was he wanted from basketball. Because of that reputation, Wilt remains an intensely polarizing player. So if I want to make the case that Wilt was the greatest basketball player of all time, I have to find a way to assuage the idea that he never had what it took to be a winner. To do that, I want to use Bill Russell as his analog, because they played in the same era and because Russell represented everything Wilt couldn't be or do. They're remembered as inverses of each other and embody contrasting ideas. Team versus individual. Defense versus offense. Me versus we. And ultimately, winning and losing. But why are they remembered as representing things so starkly? Again, because they're from the past. They're practically myths and legends at this point. There's less footage of them than there is of other great players, and because the narrative became easy to write as their careers went along. David beat Goliath, and nobody roots for Goliath. But was the fight even fair for Goliath? For starters, Bill Russell consistently had better teammates than Wilt Chamberlain did. That's as good as a fact to me, and I will maintain it even when I make the case for Bill Russell. Wilt played with great players in his career, but Bill played with Bob Cousy, a league MVP, John Havlicek, who went on to lead the Celtics to 2 titles in the 70s, Sam Jones, a 6-time All-Star and master in the clutch, and other Hall of Famers like Tommy Heinsohn, Casey Jones, and Frank Ramsey. And of all the great players that Wilt played with, he usually caught them at the beginning or the end of their careers. Aside from notable exceptions like Jerry West and Hal Greer.
I was waiting for them to say Jerry West. How great was Jerry West, man? Write in the comments how great he was. I know this is about Wilt Chamberlain, but after watching the episode 1 of Winning Time, if y'all haven't watched that, go ahead and watch that ASAP. I was watching it, and Jerry West was the most angriest guy in the world on that show. I don't even want to give it away. So go ahead and just watch it. But I will say that he was not the happiest guy in the world. And I want to say it's because him and Wilt kept losing to the Celtics in the 60s and 70s. But I really just kind of want to know how great was Jerry West? You know, how awesome was he back then? How much was of a help was he to Wilt? Did they even play that many years together? Like, I don't really know too much about that time span, but I just think it was interesting to see how upset he was in the show. It was actually super funny, man. So yeah, so if you haven't seen it, go check it out ASAP, man. It's a great first episode.
Obviously, it's easier to be a better teammate when you have a better team, but I think that the most important factor that Russell benefited from, even more than his teammates, was the leadership afforded to him by his head coach, Red Auerbach. Red was one of the most forward-thinking minds to pass through the NBA and is still on the Mount Rushmore of head coaches. Okay. Of the Celtics' 17 championships, Auerbach was a pivotal piece in 16 of them, either as Boston's coach, general manager, or president. He drafted Chuck Cooper, the first African-American, into the NBA and hired the first black NBA head coach in Bill Russell.
Shout out to
Red was an intense, competitive coach who adapted his methods to suit his players. In his own words, if you have some great potential players, there are 2 things. 1, you help make them great. 2, you devise a method of play that is suitable to their talent. And that's the thing that I think Wilt lacked more than anything. A coach who could lead him, tell him what to do and how to do it. Wilt was a prideful guy, and he cared about what people thought about him, which is one of the most natural and human things to care about. Of course, the thing that most people knew Wilt Chamberlain from was basketball, and as a basketball player, Wilt was constantly ridiculed by the media for not winning championships every single year. As he began to develop this reputation of a loser, he started scoring more points so that he could say, well, look, I scored all these points, I got all these rebounds, I did my job. And so he became known as a selfish scorer. And what did he do? He led the league in assists. Right. What do you think people said about him then? that he was stat obsessed. And so goes the legacy of Wilt Chamberlain. Wilt needed a coach who could help him channel all of his abilities into a winning style of play.
How is being stats obsessed a bad thing though? I don't know, maybe I'm just thinking about it too hard or something. I don't know, but I don't see how that's a bad thing, man. Please let me know if you know how stat padding can be a bad thing. I mean, I understand if you out there being a bad teammate and you're shutting down your teammates, not giving them confidence, like you're just being a bad teammate, and then you're past statting. But if you're just out there, just being a normal leader, like just you doing what you're supposed to be doing, and your team isn't coming with you, you should not be at fault for that. But let me know, man. Let me know. Maybe I'm thinking about it too much.
No different from guys like Kobe or Michael. I'd argue that if Wilt had played for a great coach like Red Auerbach for his entire career, he would have experienced every modicum of success that Bill Russell did. I promise I didn't just pull that theory out of my ass. I'm arguing that because it happened twice. The 2 seasons that Wilt won it all, 1967 and 1972, were marked by the influence of outstanding coaches on Wilt's game.
Okay.
Alex Hannum coached Wilt for 3 full seasons, in 1964 on the San Francisco Warriors, and in 1967 and 8 on the Philadelphia 76ers. When Hannum was hired by the Warriors in '64, he inherited a team that was beginning to unravel. The franchise had been sold during the season and relocated from Philadelphia to San Francisco, leading to the retirement of veteran scorers Paul Arizin and Tom Gola. As a result, Wilt shouldered the scoring burden and averaged 44 points and 24 rebounds a game, believing that doing so was the only way to keep the Warriors competitive. The effort was in vain though, as the team lost over half their games and missed the playoffs. And so, Hannum went to work, changing the team's approach and trying to implement strategies that would lead to winning basketball. By May of that season, this was the headline in Sports Illustrated.
Meet the new Wilt Chamberlain.
The article describes Chamberlain as exactly the kind of player you would hope he could be. He was scoring less, depending on and trusting his teammates, was defending at a high level consistently, and doing all of the little things that led to the team's success.
So he wasn't stat padding then?
That change was due in no small part to Hannum's influence. Unlike every coach before him, Hannum had stood up to Chamberlain, and in doing so had earned the superstar's respect. When Hannum stressed the importance of team play and defensive intensity, Wilt listened. The result was a 17-game improvement from the year prior and a trip to the NBA Finals, all with a team that had barely changed in personnel.
Give me that!
For the first time in his career, Wilt Chamberlain, the player who could do anything as a player, was learning how to play. The following year, the franchise found itself in financial trouble, and the owner traded Wilt to the Philadelphia 76ers for cheap players and cash. Wilt won 55 games with the club in his first full year there, and by the following season, Hannum had been hired to replace Dolph Schayes as head coach. Philadelphia started that season on unprecedented 46-4. By the end of the season, Wilt had averaged just 24 points a game, the lowest he'd had at that point in his career, to go along with nearly 8 assists and 24 rebounds a game.
So he had help now.
6 players on Philadelphia had point averages in the double digits. Wilt's abilities hadn't changed, his approach had. That Philadelphia team finished the regular season with 68 wins and 14 losses. The best record the NBA had ever seen. After dispatching Oscar Robertson and the Cincinnati Royals, Wilt found himself facing a familiar foe in the Boston Celtics. But with superb teammates and an outstanding coach, Wilt led the 76ers past Boston in just 5 games. Ending the Celtics' 8-year reign as champions.
So that was 1.
In the finals, Wilt defeated his old team, the San Francisco Warriors, in 6 games to claim his first championship and cap off the most outstanding professional campaign the NBA had ever seen. A year later, Wilt led the NBA in assists, en route to a league-high 62 wins.
Oh, so he led the league in assists.
After a 7-game loss in the playoffs in the Eastern Finals, Hannum retired, and relations between Wilt and the 76ers ownership had soured. He then demanded a trade to the Los Angeles Lakers.
Okay, welcome to La La Land.
Wilt was saddled with coaches Butch Van Breda Kolff and Joe Mulaney. Not exactly household names. The Lakers had good seasons under those coaches, but were never able to climb all the way to the top of the mountain. Bill Sharman, a hard-nosed, no-nonsense coach, took over in 1972. That season, the Lakers went on to win 33 games in a row, a record that still
33 in a row?
stands. That Lakers team finished with a record of 69-13, surpassing the mark set by Wilt's 76ers 5 years earlier. In the playoffs, they lost just 3 games on their way to the championship. Jerry West said of Sharman, he told us he thought that if we played the way he wanted us to, that we could beat anybody. He got us to believe that right away, and he did it without raising his voice once all year. As for Wilt, he was simply the guy that got us here. So there you go. That's my case. Wilt was a victim of pressure and a lack of consistent quality coaching. You might...
Like, for me, I can't just call Wilt a loser. Like, you gotta get him some help. I've liked a couple times where they say he had good coaches. He had Jerry West. He had more talent around him. He won. Like, you can't fault him for going out there and doing what he has to do, but not having enough help to actually win the game. Like, you can't fault him for that. Like, I mean, I don't know. Maybe I'm looking from the outside in. Maybe he was a bad teammate. Maybe he was pointing a lot of fingers. Like, I don't really know. But from what I see, he was out there killing, balling, doing his thing. But it just wasn't enough. But that don't make him a bad player. That don't make him a loser. That doesn't mean anything negative on him. But let me know what y'all think.
Might be saying, but Clayton, what about college? Wilt lost that UNC game under Fog Allen, and that proves that he's fundamentally a loser. And that's where you're wrong. Because guess what? Wilt never played for Fog Allen. Allen turned 70 at the end of Wilt's freshman year. And 70 was the mandatory retirement age for state employees in Kansas at the time.
He had to retire.
They appealed it. They lost.
They said that at 70 you have to retire. Like, it ain't no you have the chance to retire at 70. They said no, at 70 you better retire. Like, that's funny as hell to me.
Allen retired, and Wilt didn't get along with his replacement. In Wilt's entire career, he had exactly 2 great head coaches on 2 different teams.
That's when he won.
Both times, he turned in seasons that broke records for wins and ended in championships. So much for not being a winner.
Yeah, you need more
I know
than
it's
just
a what if.
one good player.
But if you'd given Wilt a coach like Red Auerbach for his entire career, he'd have the most decorated resume in NBA history. But remember, we're not talking about the greatest resume. We're talking about the greatest basketball player of all time.
Talking about the player, right?
And by just about every metric that exists, we're talking about Wilt Chamberlain. One last quote from Chuck Klosterman. Russell possessed intangible greatness, which means sport writers can make him into whatever metaphor they desire. Russell was the central figure for a superior franchise, so history suggests he was the greater, more meaningful force. His wins validate everything. If you side with Chamberlain, it seems like you're siding with the absurdity of numbers. But consider this question. In an alternative universe and with a different attitude, could Chamberlain have been Russell? Probably.
We will never know.
Could Russell have ever been Wilt? Never. No chance.
Okay.
Chamberlain is the only human who could have ever been Chamberlain.
That's a good point. That's a good point. He said that if Wilt Chamberlain would have got drafted to Boston and had Red Auerbach and had this great team that Bill Russell had, it's a case that Wilt Chamberlain would have had all those rings. He would have been just as successful as Bill Russell. But they said if Bill Russell had to be on that Lakers team or that Philly team or that Warriors team, there's no way he would have been like Wilt Chamberlain. So that kind of means a lot, when you're trying to decide who was the actual better player. But that video was great, man. I enjoyed that. I learned a lot. I'm going to definitely be doing some more Wilt Chamberlain videos. I think it's a video out there on it's like a comparison video between Bill Russell and Wilt Chamberlain. So I'm going to get into that since I've done both of their Making the Case videos. Both of them was great. But I hope y'all enjoyed that video, man. Make sure y'all subscribe to the channel if y'all haven't. Roll to 10K. Once I get to 10K subscribers, I will be giving out a $50 Amazon gift card to one of my lucky subscribers, man. Especially, I'm going to give it to someone that comments a lot. Someone that I recognize, someone that really rocks with my content. Because if y'all rock with me, then I'm going to rock with y'all. But before we end this video, I just kind of want y'all to talk to me about, do y'all really believe like these stats that they have for Wilt Chamberlain? Because a lot of this stuff was just kind of just word of mouth. I mean, there was definitely some super athletic dunks that they had in here that they kind of captured on film that we was able to see, but do y'all really believe that he had 100 points in the game? Like, there's no film of actually seeing him score 100 points in the game. There's also no film that shows that he averaged 50 and 30 for a season. Like, there's no real film. And the last thing, if there's any kids watching, y'all should turn it off right now. I don't want y'all to hear what I got to say. But how much do y'all believe that he had? They said that, well, he said it, not they. He said that he had been with over 20,000 women during this time. And that's a whole lot of women. But what makes it even worse is he has 0 kids. So I don't know if I believe that, man, but I'll believe it on that note. Let me know what y'all think about that, but we out.